I would like to call this meeting of March 6, 2024 to order. Roll call, please. Ms. Towson.
Director Applegate.
Here.
Director Kenworthy.
Here.
Director Parker.
Here.
Director Reed.
Here.
And Dr. Barta.
I would like to thank our live simultaneous Spanish interpreters for joining us today, and we are live streaming our meeting. To begin with, please stand and join us for this afternoon's Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve today's meeting agenda?
I motion to approve today's meeting agenda as presented in board docs.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda for today's meeting of March 6, 2024 as presented. Roll call, please, Ms. Towson.
Director Applegate.
Yes.
Director Kenworthy.
Yes.
Director Parker.
Yes.
Director Reed.
Yes.
Dr. Barta.
The agenda is approved. And the purpose for the first topic this afternoon is for the board to receive a presentation on the Green at 38th project and discuss the proposed agreement with the City of Wheat Ridge to convey district property for the project. For the board and our listening public, Jeffco Public Schools and the City of Wheat Ridge plan to enter into an agreement for the district to convey a portion of its property, approximately 1.62 acres, to the City of Wheat Ridge for their Green at 38th project. In return, the school district will receive a new parking lot. The agreement will contain a reverter clause if the property is not used for a park or like use in the future. The parking lot would be installed during the summer of 2024. Before I hand this off to Mr. Gatlin, Superintendent Dorland, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, President Parker. I want to welcome Mr. Patrick Goff, who is here. He's the city manager of the City of Wheat Ridge. And so thanks for being here. It's nice to have you. We appreciate the partnership and opportunity to collaborate on this project and, of course, many others, as we do with all of our cities in our county. And thank you, Mr. Gatlin, for working with Mr. Goff to prepare this presentation to update our board on this, what I think is an exciting project.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Board, President Parker and Superintendent Dorland. President Parker, you did a great job outlining the context of what this presentation is about. And just to highlight that, I did want to summarize that really the goal of this is to provide information about a proposal and a project that the City of Wheat Ridge has been working on for a while, where the district would convey approximately 1.62 acres of our current parcel to the city for their project that they call the Green at 38th. And in return, we would receive a new parking lot, and we'll go through some of the specifics of that. And one key component of this is a reverter clause in conveying the property, that if this parcel that we're conveying isn't used for park purposes in the future, the district would then get ownership back of the parcel. And we'll talk a little bit about one additional component with the reverter that I want to make you aware of, but we'll get to that in a moment. And so I did want to thank Mr. Goff for being here. He's been working on this project for quite a while, and I wanted to give him an opportunity just to talk through the project a little bit and provide a little bit of background information to the board on all the work that they've done with this.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Thank you for having me here this afternoon. I'm going to start with a kind of a really interesting fact about the site you may not know about. And I just told Jeff I had my city council crying Monday night about it. I don't intend to make you cry, but it's pretty cool. There's a long history at this site, even before Stevens, even before this project. But so we were told during the research on this project, our architect who's working on the design did a lot of research. The Stevens Elementary site is the longest continuous operating school site in the state of Colorado. I'm not sure if you all knew that. Maybe you can correct me on that, but that's what we found out. And there's some historic documents we looked up. There was a gentleman who moved to the area in 1881 he recorded in some historical narratives that the schoolhouse was used for church services, a meeting place for literary society, farmers club, school elections, and other social affairs. Entertainment was provided at this location, and everybody in the neighborhood, as well as those traveling long distance, attended. Plays were performed, and music was played at the site, which drew large crowds. So I think there's that history is really what we're trying to replicate here and keep in our community. Back in about 2005, we had a neighborhood revitalization strategy conducted for our community to figure out how we can continue to prosper and grow. The study concluded that Wheat Ridge is a community that really defines and lacks a defined center, a place for our community to go. And they really emphasize creating 38th Avenue and this property as a place to go for our community. So this vision has been reinforced numerous times in our planning documents over the years. So consensus was reached in 2018 by council to move forward with the community engagement process. We had extensive community engagement. We met with a lot of the kiddos at the school, the parents, principal, some of the teachers. The kids are very excited about this project, as is the Stevens community. So we're very excited that this is going to be a joint use project with the school district, with the community. It's going to have a lot of amenities on the site. You're going to go over the design a little bit. You want me to talk about this? So we've been using this location for quite some time with the school's cooperation, the school district's cooperation for community events. We call this the green. It's just a big open green field. We have holiday events there, summer events, bike tours, all kinds of different things. And we wanted to really formalize this a bit and make it even better, and not for just special events, but for passive use. We worked with the school district, and at the same time, the school district wanted to have a better parking lot for the school, something that was safer, more efficient for school drop-offs. So it really worked out pretty well. And we went through several iterations of the project and ended up on the last slide, I think, that Jeff had up here. But the school, as you can see, the parking lot's going to be adjacent to the school property. Some of the pictures I think Jeff has up here doesn't have the most recent design element that we added. We worked with the principal and some of the parents. They wanted access points on both sides of the parking lot, one to High Court, one to Upham Court. So we did add that at the very last minute. So it does show up in this design right here. And then, so this parking lot portion should start construction June 1st. We think we can get it done in 2 months. You had some staff at our council meeting on Monday night. They said you recently finished a parking lot, I think, in Arvada project in 2 months. So we're hopeful we can get that done. And then the park portion will start right after that. We're hoping to have it completed by May of next year.
Thank you, Patrick. And a couple of things I wanted to point out with the configuration. This is the configuration right now as it exists. And when the first concept was announced, this was the original proposal. And one of the issues with this proposal is the only entry and exit point was on Upham. Am I saying that right? Upham Street on the west side of the lot. And that actually created a little bit of concern from the school community, from the principal. And I know that some board members maybe heard about that as well. And so we really appreciate the collaboration and the work together with Patrick, his team, the district's team, and with the school and the school community to really add that entry and exit point on, I believe it's High Court, on the east side of the lot. So now we have an entry and an exit point that are in the same place. And that was really the crux of a lot of the concern, really worried about a pinch point of the same entry and exit point. So we wanted to make sure that we called that out so you could see that there was a solution that everybody was pleased with. I think it is worth mentioning the actual parking space count is decreased by 3 with this design. But in working with the school, that wasn't a major concern. And so feeling like there's other benefits that this is providing, they could live with that. I wanted to remind and point out to the board kind of how we plan on completing this transaction. we did already enter into a non-binding letter of intent with the city that just outlined kind of these components. And really the next item with this will be the board to take formal action at next week's meeting around a resolution to surplus the parcel. We actually, have to go through that process that we're not going to be using this since this is a long-term, a permanent deal, and to approve a purchase and sale agreement. So that'll be in action at next week's board meeting. Then we'll actually have a special warranty deed to convey the property. And the key piece of this is we're giving up an interest in our property, but we want to make sure that we have protection in getting what we say we're getting in this new parking lot. So we won't actually close on any of this until we have an agreement through an IGA related to the construction and use of the parking lot and the green. And so Patrick and I had some discussion about just reciprocal use of the school using the green users using the parking lot for events. I know that there have been concerns around like when concerts would happen. Are they going to happen in midday? And I mean, all of those are the kinds of things that we can iron out through that IGA. But that'll be part of the process in this. One thing I do want to point out too is in the deed to the city, and you can jump in, Patrick, if I don't get all of this right. The city right now is looking to decommission a park in a separate location. And on that park, the Jefferson County has an interest in that park. And so by decommissioning that park, the city's looking to shift the county's interest to this parcel. So all that means is, and we have our real estate lawyer really working well actually with the county and with the city on this, is that the county will have some type of an interest in this being a park also. But if this stops being a park, it becomes our parcel back. So I just want to make the board aware that there is this kind of added layer that you'll see in the contract language for next week's item that is a little bit of a newer development. But we feel really confident and comfortable knowing that our interest is being preserved, that if this isn't a park, it becomes our parcel again. So I just want to make you aware of that. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Patrick.
Not necessarily. It just comes down to the fact that both reverters mean the same thing and our interest clauses. And if we stop using this as a park, it goes back to the school district. As simple as that. The park that we currently have the reverter on is in the Safeway parking lot. If anybody's familiar with that, at Wadsworth at 38th Avenue. It just really didn't work very well. It was built back in the late 80s. It's right in the middle of a very busy shopping center. It's just not usable anymore, especially with the Wadsworth reconstruction. So now that the property is going to be deeded to the city, Jefferson County Open Space is amenable to transferring that river from Town Center Park to the green. They have a policy where their inventory of open space can never decrease in square footage. So we can't just get rid of the river around Town Center. We always have to move it to another location. And then when we sell the Town Center Park, we can move that money into this development.
So that's really the next steps and what we're looking to finalize for the materials for next week. And we just wanted to open it up to any questions or comments that you might have.
Board members, do you have questions, comments?
I just wanted to check in and see if you've talked with the neighbors, the neighboring if there's a homeowners association or community organizations, if they're supportive, and what that conversation has been like.
Yeah, we've over the several years, we've had numerous engagements with the business community, the neighborhood, parents, teachers, students, and it's all been very positive. We did receive, as Jeff mentioned, we had the last minute conversations and concerns about the access points on the parking lot, but I talked to principal and the parent representatives, and they're happy with it now. They've seen the design. I think we've had one negative. She was at the council meeting on Monday. She didn't speak, but I think she's concerned about the exit out to High because there is quite a bit of traffic. The city is committed to conducting another traffic study now that there's, I think, 150 more families or kids in this school moved from Wilmer Davis, 150 to 200. There hasn't been a traffic study since that's happened. We had the apartments that were built just to the west. There was a traffic study when that went up. Did not indicate any need for any additional improvements along 38th, but with the more kids, it may. So we're committed to a traffic study to see if any future improvements need to be made.
I'm going to beat this one a little bit more just to make sure, because we did hear a little bit of communication on this. So you did meet with the folks representing the PTO and the SAC. Okay,
We did. Yep.
perfect.
Mark.
Good.
Forgot names now. Yep.
No, that's okay. We don't have to say names. I just want to make sure that those specific
Yep.
groups were represented. And Mr. Gatlin, when you said that they were satisfied, they've seen this plan, we're not going to get more angry emails next week. We approve this.
No, and we did do one last check-in with the principal earlier this week just to make sure we had the thumbs up, and yeah, it's all good.
Awesome. Is there a traffic light at Upham and 38th? Because I know there's one at High.
There's not right now, and that is something that we're going to look at in the traffic study to see if that's needed. There is a crosswalk, lighted or rapid repeater crosswalk there at Upham, and I can't remember if High. Yeah, at High Court too.
It looks like it from the drawings.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that traffic study will be really helpful, especially with the new families and the new traffic and whatnot. So when we talk about the IGA, because this is one of my big questions, so I'm really glad you brought it up, and just kind of the mixed use of the facility. Am I correct that the city would technically own the greens, and the school would own the district would own the school, and the district would own the parking lot? Okay. And then I'm super happy we're going to have this agreement. I think that's going to be really important to make sure we know who can use all the things at all the times. Is there any, and I hope we don't need this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there any kind of boundary, visual or otherwise, between the greens and the school, such that if there is a concert, people aren't necessarily like coming onto the district property? And if so, do we have liability to cover that?
Yeah, there is. I don't know if you can pull up maybe the schematic again. There's a pretty good division. Maybe the next one. You can see there's a fairly large barrier. It's not a barrier necessarily, but it could be a barrier between the parking lot and the green. It's the large sidewalk path. That could be, if there's concern, they could be fenced potentially for different types of events. So yeah, I think this design really does separate the school use from the park and from 38th Avenue pretty well. There was many other designs where we were going to keep the parking lot where it was and the green where it was on the other side. I think everybody agreed this was a better and safer use for the school to keep it separated from 38th. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I guess also I'm thinking about in the natural evolution. So I have a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And if we were at any event and she saw a playground, she would beeline for that playground, regardless of understanding that it might not be part of the concert we were at.
Yeah.
And so I just want to make sure that from a liability standpoint, and maybe I should be looking at our legal counsel, do we have any concerns with that?
I mean, I'll let Julie answer, but our playgrounds are open almost all the time. And we don't, they're paid with taxpayer funds. Taxpayers often use the playgrounds. Julie, would you answer it any other way? So I don't have concerns. If you do, please obviously share.
I do not.
Perfect. That's all.
Thanks.
Let me make sure I don't have any more before I hand it back. Oh, and then if it comes back to us, if it's ever not a park, is that a first right of refusal, or is it just an automatic, we take no action, it comes back?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure the mechanism that we'll use around that. We'll have that spelled out in the contract language, so we know if it's a new deed back to us, exactly if it happens automatically. We'll make sure that that's very clear.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Sorry, I missed the beginning. You said it will come to us next week. Is there any budget item attached to this for the district?
So there's no financial cost to the district on this, and I don't know, Patrick, if you're able to share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're curious about what our budget is for this project, right now we're at about, with design, about $7.6 million for the full project. The parking lot is about 1.4 million of that right now, and the city is paying for that. And we're going to do a little bit of value engineering to get this cost down, but we're excited. We've received quite a few grants. This might be interesting to you also. We got a Department of Local Affairs Energy Impact grant of $850,000, a GOCO grant of $500,000. We're applying for a CDOT Revitalization Main Street grant of $250,000. So there's a lot of grants that are going into this project. Gates Foundation, Waste Management, some small grants, but so a lot of money coming from different sources. None from the school district.
Okay, so I'm assuming that, in the agreement, we'll basically be saying like no concerts during school hours and, when they're disruptive. What I am wondering about, though, is the parking lot. If people from the neighborhood are coming during school hours to use the park, will they be using the school parking lot, and will that impact the ability of parents and other people visiting the actual school being able to find somewhere to park?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to put that in the agreement that during school hours that the parking lot is for school use only. It may be hard to manage and enforce. We're still having an issue right now. As I mentioned, the new apartments that went up just to the west of Upham, some of those individuals are parking in the parking lot, mainly at night. In close contact with the principal, we're discussing it, and she says at this point it's not causing a major issue, but that's not our intent for the parking lot to be used for any other event except for school activities during the school hours.
I just want to follow up on Dr. Varda's question about the budget. When we have the approval of purchase and sale agreement, so there will be dollars put into the agreement, but it will be a wash. The purchase and the sale will be equal.
The purchase and the sale agreement, my understanding, will be a very nominal $1 type amount, just to complete that transaction, use that method to do it.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much. It looks very exciting.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. The board will now receive an update on the status of district budget development. We began to hear about the FY25 budget in November 2023. Presentations on this topic will be made to the board monthly through June, culminating in a vote of the board at the regular meeting on June 13th, 2024, although the date may shift if necessary. And we have allotted 45 minutes for this section. And before I hand it off to Ms. Copeland, Chief Financial Officer, Superintendent Dorland, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'm looking forward to the board receiving this update from Ms. Copeland and Mr. Sampson. I think also it will be an opportunity for you when Mr. Bowditch comes later today to get the latest and greatest information from him related to the state legislature and the School Finance Act. I did have a chance to be downtown at the Capitol last Friday morning, talking to various legislators about school finance alongside Ed, so I can jump into that conversation when the time is appropriate. But in the meantime, I think we have some really good information to share with you as we begin to enter multiple months of conversation around the district budget. So thank you. Ms. Copeland, Mr. Sampson?
Great. Good afternoon, board members. We're very excited to bring you this update, and you will see us again every month until June, which we enjoy. This one does focus on school budgets, and just a little bit of context. We distributed to schools their budgetary allocations January 8th, we think, roughly. And so that is the point in time when they start trying to make their decisions about how to spend. And obviously that's a big chunk of the district budget. And that process effectively commits us because then they're able to post positions and do all the things they need to do. Obviously, this board has to approve the budget, and so none of anything that's happened, is set in stone. But that is sort of the process and the lead time necessary to recruit and retain the best talent we can in our schools. Brian and I are facilitators of the budget process. We are not deciders internally or in any other way, shape, or form. And so I feel like probably the best questions you're going to want to ask are some of the why questions. Why this investment? Why this spend? We can't always honestly speak to that. We have to lean on our program lead peers, the superintendent, and other folks who really know the full rationale. But we do work really hard to try and make sure that the numbers we bring you are accurate, that the process is transparent, that folks feel like we're a good intermediary to receive their numbers, check them, and then represent them to you. So that is really our role here this afternoon. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Mr. Sammons.
Thank you, Ms. Copeland. Can you hand me the switcher, Magoo? Thank you very much.
As you're getting ready, Mr. Sammons, I'll just mention that Dr. Kim is here and I'm here. So if we get into some of the school-based investments and you do have some questions about why a school might do one thing over another, Dr. Kim and I can probably answer some of those questions. And I see Ms. Nikothodes, who's here too, and she can also probably lean in. So great. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Okay, so this afternoon, we are here to present a high-level update on the budget development of Jeffco Public Schools. With this, the topics we'll cover here today are the legislative update, which I think you'll get a little more detail later on, a revenue projection update with some assumptions. We'll talk through the preliminary data from the school budget process and give a preview of the April study session. Please note that the FY 24-25 budget and appropriation is voted on by the board in the June 2024 regular meeting. Okay, so since the December economic forecast, the state has revised up its economic growth expectations due to a rebound of consumption and investments. As a result, the revenue growth also increased from September forecast. The TABOR refunds are expected in 24 and in FY 25. I would also like to point out that the forecasted consumer price indexes that they established are 5.2% in FY 24-25 and 3.1% in FY 25-26. I want to point these out because these are the amounts we use in our revenue assumptions presented later. The next OSPB economic forecast is provided in mid-March. All right, so we thought it would be helpful to include a state budgeting timeline within this presentation today to help give context to where the state currently is in their budget development process. Knowing the majority of our revenue, it depends on decisions made at the Capitol. The governor's budget is proposed in November. The Joint Budget Committee, or the JBC, meets in months of February and March to present the figure settings of each state department's budgets and appropriation. The long bill is drafted and passed between the months of March and May. It's always been later the last few years due to COVID. As you probably know, there are multiple changes that occur from when the governor's budget is proposed all the way to the passage of the Colorado long bill. All right, so after we're going through the OSPB assumptions, these assumptions are what we use for our forecast of our revenue. Here we have it laid out, organized by fiscal year by side, so you can easily see and compare the 2 years of FY 24-25 and FY 25-26. For both fiscal years, the main assumption is that there's no change to the school finance formula. We are using the state's forecasted CPI. Free and reduced lunch percentages are holding flat from FY 23-24 rate, and there's a complete buy down of the budget stabilization factor in FY 24-25, and that's being maintained in FY 25-26. The enrollment is decreasing just under 1,000 students in both fiscal years, but the funded count decrease in FY 25 is over 1,900, and in FY 26 just over 1,550. The difference in the funded count decline is due to the School Finance Act's 5-year averaging calculation. We are anticipating no change in charter school enrollment, which aligns with the historical trends that we've been seeing. The assumptions of the forecasted revenue, slide. Even with the full buy down of the budget stabilization factor, the district revenue is projected to increase $26 million or 2.8% year over year in FY 24-25, and only $4 million in FY 25-26, a 0.5% increase year over year. Both of these increased percentages are growing less than the forecast on inflation due to the funding count declines, and the majority of Jeffco's mill levy override revenue does not grow with inflation.
I just want to jump in there really quick. So just again, remember our revenue is made up of our total program, which are the local taxes, as well as the state backfill. And then on top of that, we have our mill levy overrides. And so that's 100%, right? The majority of that is the state backfill and the local property taxes or the total program, which is, why we're not seeing the full CPI amount on our increase, because the other portion, the smaller portion, but still substantial, of our mill levy overrides do not increase by CPI like the majority of the total program does. And so that's the real challenge, I think, that we are up against is our employees are facing, our expenses are facing a CPI of a little bit over 5%, and yet our revenue is really at 2.8. And that's just something that we talk often about as we're dealing with and planning for, budgeting. It's a real challenge. So I just want to reiterate that. And I appreciate that you guys highlighted it here on this slide.
Thank you, Superintendent Dorland. All right. So our favorite enrollment conversion slide is back. Everyone's favorite. So what this is showing here is the 5-year averaging helps provide districts a runway to adjust programming to match the enrollment levels of declining enrollment. Here you can see how the 5-year averaging of funding count is really starting to catch up with Jeffco, with the state subsidy declining from $38 million in FY24 to $24 million in FY25-26. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Copeland to start off the budget development expense update section.
All right.
I'm sorry, Brenna, can I add one more thing before you go into that?
Yes, please.
Just based on the last two slides, can you actually go back to slide 8? Being able to show you guys the 25-26 is really important, and we just should be upfront and say to you, it's not accurate because there are so many unknown variables, one of which is what will the state do in terms of changes to the funding formula. And the state task force on school finance recently made recommendations to the state legislature. We can talk more about this as well when Ed is here, but I fully anticipate, you can see the year over year percent change in 25-26 as 0.5%, which is even less than the 2.8% that we have this year. And so it looks pretty bleak in the out year. Based on what the state does with the formula, if anything, it could look better, but it could also very likely look worse. So we can talk more about that when Ed is here. And I do think one of the things that the board should consider is doing a study session and getting a deeper understanding of what some of the task force has been recommending, so that you would understand and and can help make sense for our legislators about what some of those changes that are proposed might impact on our revenue. But we'll talk about that. I think I have a note that I'll bring this back up when we have Ed here, and we can talk more about that during the legislative session.
I was just wondering on the assumption for 25-26 that no change to the finance formula. Is that just in there because we just don't know?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why I think, Dr. Varda, I'm suggesting that maybe we take some time this spring to study what some of the initial recommendations are, so that the board has at least as much understanding as we do about what those recommendations would do to that assumption. So thanks for highlighting that.
Great. So as we mentioned, today's focus really has to do with dollars budgeted at the school level. But we do want to start by reminding folks that what we sometimes refer to as the student-based budgets in our schools are just really one piece of the equation. So the student-based budget, which is a financial allocation direct to the school, it does, it is largely grounded in the enrollment count itself at the school and then the student factors such as at risk in the school. It does adjust funding amounts per kid so that our smaller schools have sufficient purchasing power to buy some of those positions that could be thought of as kind of minimal, if you will. And so I just provide that grounding. I believe the board knows this to be true, but it's really helpful in the context of what we're about to present, also for anyone who's listening or watching this process. Staff services are direct staff allocation from our departmental budgets, and they really do provide additional important professionals who are making the school day possible for our kiddos. And so principals do often have say in the hiring decisions around the folks that are allocated, if you will, from a departmental budget. But the departments often provide professional development and oversight in other ways. And so that's particularly beneficial, for example, as we think about our services to students with disabilities. The additional professional development and oversight provided by Mr. Pilaro and his team is really essential to the success of those professionals that come out of his departmental budget. So this is a quick summary in dollar terms and student counts for what has been allocated. So that first column is an enrollment column. Those thousands figures represent approximately 63,000 students that the district will be serving and will be funding through the SBB formula. So you might say, well, who are we serving and funding that's outside either elementary, middle, senior, or SBB modified? Well, that would be our ECE kiddos, right? They aren't represented here. And obviously, per universal pre-K, it's not that we don't consider them students we serve. So just want to make that clarification. The preliminary allocation in millions, so that $499 that looks like a very small number is actually a big number. That's almost $500 million that we've now allocated out. On a per student basis, you see the figures there. And yes, there is some variance, and that starts to speak a little bit to some of that calibrating we do to make sure that schools can afford the right level of staffing and how that plays out at the different school levels. And then there's additional variation behind that you can't see on the slide based on school size and student need. This year, we made some improvements to our SBB allocations. The first is school leaders now received, if they are receiving Title I funding, they received it at the same time as their SBB allocation, and it's represented in the same budgeting tool. The tool we use is called Anaplan. What that means at a very practical level is they're able to make cohesive decisions about how to deploy both sets of funds. This is the first time we've been able to do it in that way. In the past, they have to sort of sit down and have a different Title I budget discussion with a different group of folks at a different process and a different timeline. As you can imagine, that's not ideal when principals are trying to make sure they have clear conversations with community and then hire and recruit and retain the best talent. So we're really excited about that particular improvement this year. This is the first year that our middle schools and high schools received an allocation based on a projected enrollment instead of current year actual. The projected enrollment is something we rolled out for elementary schools through the last budget cycle. And it really actually seemed to work well. Brian is fond of pointing out that on the whole, I believe our elementary allocation this year was 6 students off. Yeah. Anywho, there's so few things we get to be excited about. Sometimes we have to celebrate the little ones. It's a big one, sorry. But it did seem to work because, again, when you make an informed projection, and oftentimes the principal was already doing the same thing. And so we're just maximizing our dollars by doing it as a system at the system level, right? Because why say we're going to consume budget that we actually know probably the kid's not going to be there, and we're going to take it back at October count, et cetera. So this over time will actually decrease the net adjustment at October count, which again means we spend every dollar in the way we maximally can to benefit students today. Lastly, just a couple small things. Connections Learning Center and JRLP moved to SVB modified, which is a fancy term for just they get SVB plus some money to do the unique types of programming that they do. Okay. So again, in terms of trying to summarize what we see in the data, in the types of choices that our schools are making and bringing forward, we wanted to share this with the board and the public so that you can start to see how this is all playing out, right? And again, I won't be able to tell you why, but these are the numbers we can see in the system. So Mr. Salmons mentioned that we thought we were going to have approximately 950 fewer students, and so we allocated out to an enrollment count that was 950 lower. And obviously when we're serving fewer kiddos, we don't need quite as many staff. And so what we are seeing here is a planned reduction of approximately, I can't do the math in my head that fast, 69 students from the current year FTE counts to next year's preliminary budgeted counts. Now, I want to say this is before some of the adjustments we've made so far. So there's some additional investment priorities we've identified subsequent to producing this slide and subsequent to essentially this is a round one set of priorities. So there'll be a round two, and we're happy to update you once these numbers will look a little different. Nonetheless, what we look for on at least the finance side is, do the year-over-year percentage changes, by position type sort of resonate? Are there outliers? Do those outliers make sense? So we've highlighted one of the outliers, which on a percentage basis appears like, oh, okay. But it's really important to know that SEL, psych, social work, and nursing, which is, I know those are abbreviations, but that's what that green line represents. The primary allocations are actually still in the department budget. These are just additional positions that schools purchase to serve general education students or part of a position, right? And sometimes, when we get all jargony, we refer to that as some version of a buy up. That sounds sort of weird when you're talking about a human. We don't buy humans, but nonetheless, it does mean that a principal is investing a portion of their budget to extend the work time or work availability of these professionals who serve students and beyond the allocation that's tied to the students with disabilities in their building. So that's what that line is about. I think that's it. Those were the points I wanted to make in terms of what we're seeing in the data. And, the summary point, budgeted FTEs declining by about 2% approximately is, again, in line with the enrollment decline of 2%. So that's a little bit of a check around, okay, is anything out of whack? And no, we don't see anything out of whack here. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm really excited to present this information to you today. I'm a little bit nervous with this stuff, but with the hard work of the budget team and the school leaders, we have been able to budget staff to align with the subjects they teach. This will be the first year this budget process is completely rolled out to all schools. So with this data, we can now present budget decisions made at schools at the core classroom and elective classroom levels district-wide. The analysis provided here shows the student to core classroom staff FTE ratios. As you can see, the expected correlation between staffing levels and supplemental SVB funding designed to support our at-risk students. Okay, so the more supplemental funding they are receiving, the smaller core classroom sizes they are having. And that's what the trend line that we're showing here. The green box is our Title I identified schools. Okay. You probably can't read the callouts in the graph due to the size presented in the room, but these callouts in each graph are now presented in the next 2 slides. There are a couple of outliers on the secondary slide on the far right in the green box that are higher. These are they teach more English as a second language, and those are identified as elective courses, but we know those schools are teaching those as core classrooms. But just based on the identification of those classes as subjects, they're identified as electives. But knowing those 2 schools would be lower to the trend level if we were to identify those as core classrooms. Okay.
I jump in on this one. Thank you. I think this is really interesting data. So we talk often about class size, and I think it's evidence that our district has put some energy, effort, and priority into maintaining smaller class sizes across the K-12 continuum, especially in our Title I schools. And I mean, obviously, it's not hard and fast. You see some outliers. And I will just tell you from my experience, Dr. Kim's experience in other districts, we have both commented that these averages or ratios that you see kind of listed are much lower than what we are used to seeing in other school districts. And so I think there has historically been investment in class size in Jeffco to the point where I think we're seeing some pretty good ratios at lower than I would guess most front range districts, as the ones that I've been in for sure.
May I ask a quick question? What are the data labels on the axes, just so I can be clear?
Yes. So the up and down is the classroom sizes, and then on the bottom is going to be the FRL percentage.
Thank you.
Of course.
Question. I don't know if it do we account for like size of the school? I'm thinking of like this area of Title I schools are smaller. So I wondered, would that naturally mean I don't know, does that impact the ratio, the size of the school? If there's bigger schools, do they tend to have bigger,
I think that's a great question. To answer your question, and we can do this, we would probably want to switch out the x-axis and turn it into some version of size. And so if we can come back to you, we'd like to be able to give you an accurate answer.
Sorry, I was writing that down for a note to provide that. Awesome. So I'm going to go into the next 2 slides. Okay, so here we have sample schools of primary schools, and the next one's going to be secondary schools. But what this table here is showing is the budget decisions made at the school level utilizing student ratios. All right, so these 2 schools are both elementary schools with similar FRL percentage. School A is around 50 students smaller, so I'll make sure I identify that here. School A made the decision to have smaller classroom sizes, core classroom sizes, with more instructional support staff and less administrative and office staff to serve their school. School B's decision is to have slightly larger core classroom enrollment, just over the average student to instructional staff support ratios, and an additional administrative position to better serve this particular school. Both schools spend more on salaries than the average elementary school. Okay. These 2 schools are both middle schools with similar FRL percentage, and then school A is around 100 students smaller. Secondary schools have larger variation in their sizes, including because we have high schools all the way down to smaller middle schools. School A made the decision to have smaller core classroom sizes with more instructional support staff and less administrative and office staff. But this administrative office staff is still lower than the average ratios you can see on the far right. School A also decided to set aside budget in the contingency to help offset any October adjustment that they're anticipating with declining enrollment. I'm sorry. School B decided to have slightly larger core classroom enrollment, but when looking at the student-teacher ratio for all teachers, they're just above the average, so they're really close to being in total. So that means they have more electives, essentially, within their school. And they also decided to purchase an additional administrative position in the school.
So we work with this data all the time. And so we're like, oh, this is the story we see in the data, no problem. And I'm looking at the slide thinking, oh, it's a bunch of numbers. It's not super intuitive always. So I do think, I think sometimes we sound very, I don't know, numerically focused. But again, the point here, the story is around schools making different choices that reflect the unique needs of their kids. And so we're just trying to show you some examples of how those choices play out in terms of the priorities that school make. Because we often, get questions from the public or from whomever, well, what really is different? You say that SBB and this approach enables a school community to make some type of choice. And so we do want to see some variation because that actually means folks are making conscious choices. And so that's a little bit of what we're illustrating here is how that can play out in these ratios. And again, because it's student to staff, a higher number means you have more students served by the staff person, and a lower number means you have fewer students served by a staff member. So as he was talking through that, I was just thinking maybe we should orient you to the ratio.
Yeah, I think I might just dig in and give an example. Maybe you can help me as I do this. I think the one thing that is striking on slide 16 is the difference in amount that school A put into non-salary versus school B. And so why would they do that? Why would they be holding that money in a non-salary account? What's the purpose? Why do they need so much more than the $155 per student in school B? And maybe Brenna or Brian, can you guys explain why that might be?
Yes, they set aside budget in a contingency account, a holding account, to offset any enrollment declines that they're anticipating in that building, right? So we do know they're anticipating less enrollment than the projections are allocating to that school, which is great. The principal is doing what they have been doing for a while now, and they're setting aside an allocation to help offset. So they don't want to staff their building and then have to do anything with that staff whenever the enrollment came in later.
Superintendent Dorland, can I also add an
Please.
element to this? One of the things that's really important is there's some decision making and some control that our building leaders have. However, we also recognize that students don't walk into our school in groups of 20. And so there are times that we have 17 kids in a class because if we had not added that teacher, then we would have 32. And so while some of the core teacher numbers do look like they might have made a decision to make a class size bigger or smaller, sometimes it is sheerly by the nature of how many students they have in a grade level.
And that's in particular true at elementary. At secondary, some of the differences in core teachers also has to do with what electives students sign up for and what courses they choose to enroll in. And so, and what credits they still need. And I mean, on and on. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, having sat on a school accountability committee, this is really relevant to those conversations because we were involved in conversations around projected enrollment, actual numbers, the amount of SBB, all of those things do come to a place where the school accountability committee and the principal and some of the leadership in the school are talking about what are our options. Will we want to do this option or that option? And I remember being in those conversations. So it makes sense to me that there's variation here because different schools are focused on different priorities. And that should be based on feedback they're getting from people who are in their community, right? Ideally. But this all makes sense to me. And I really appreciate how this is broken out in this chart because it does help to tell that story. But thank you for bringing that up. The numbers are actually telling a story about how the schools are making different choices with the resources that they have. I think that's valuable. Go for it.
I just had a question on slide 16, but I'm almost wondering if it's just a typo on instructional staff support. I was curious why the actuals are so much lower than the average, but I'm wondering if that average is because the average wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't all add up.
right?
I will double check it. But again, the secondary schools, the variation is so large with the sizes of the schools because it's middle schools and high schools, and some of our largest and some of our smallest. And so I will double check that number, the 390, and get back to you. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I missed my window. When we are projecting enrollment and then we get the numbers in October, when are the schools notified if they might have to give back funding? I mean, obviously some teachers are preparing for this or some principals are preparing for this, but when does that hit their books?
It's a great question. So over the last 2 years, we've made improvements and we give it as soon as possible. So I'm going to say that, right? So we are now communicating the October adjustments second week of October. So we pull the information October 1st. We do all of our adjustments and calculations for the next 2 weeks. We inform the principals and the community soups simultaneously. So then they have conversations immediately after that.
Can I throw in an and statement there? And we all watch Enroll Jeffco very carefully. And so the budget process does allow for example, if the school comes to us today and says, my numbers in Enroll Jeffco today are higher than what you projected me at. And we sit down and we see the number and we're like, oh my gosh, you're right. And so, within reason, right? If they're talking about 2 kiddos, we're sort of like, okay. But above a threshold, we will actually adjust their allocation today so that they can plan ahead, right? And feel like they have the resources. Now, we still hold them accountable. So we call it a loan against their enrollment that they have in Enroll Jeffco today. But this process does seem to work really well. We did it last year, and it did allow us to true up a little sooner and also in meaningful increments so that schools can plan accordingly. And so on the flip side of that, school leaders are absolutely looking at their Enroll Jeffco numbers today. And if they're lower, to the illustration here, the school leaders probably got that money in a contingency line as opposed to dedicated to a staff resource or other expense because they feel like whatever's in Enroll Jeffco is going to hold, and they don't want a dramatic October count true up. So what we see in October count is that a substantial portion of the true up is managed through contingency accounts held at the school. Does that make sense? So it doesn't, in terms of the notice provision, while yes, technically we don't finalize anything until mid-October, it's very much a dynamic and ongoing analysis and conversation between the principal and the budget analyst. And we have processes in place to manage 2 shifts as soon as we see them.
I have one more question.
I was just going to add that the other thing that's helping schools through the fall adjustments is their carry forward. And that has, we allow for a cap on their carry forward. And if they don't have the funds to pay back, but they still feel that they need that staff member, they may go ahead and fund it with their carry forward for a year. But that's one-time funds. And so those carry forward dollars are slowly diminishing. I think 2 factors that are, I guess, have provided some impact onto the carry forward is, number one, the ESSER funds that we have supported schools with, I think have allowed them to build up some of their fund balance and have that carry forward to support them. And it has been supportive for our schools to level set to their new enrollment realities, right? And so that's a good thing, but at the same time, it's a runway that does have an end to it, right? I mean, because it is a one-time, they are one-time funds, and over time, those one-time funds are going to go away. And then once they go away, that has huge staffing impacts. So one of the things that Dr. Kim and I are planning to do with the team this fall is set up a pretty robust review on a weekly basis of staffing and class sizes. I would say at the elementary level, just across grade levels, but then I think at the secondary level, also in some of our electives, because we need to know where do we have such slow class sizes that we may have a school that's running up against a cliff and not able to afford that type of class size the following year. So we're gonna, I think this fall, have a lot more data and understanding of some of what people are investing in and what might need to shift as their fund balance might get smaller and smaller.
One last question. I'm going to take our pause that I can ask a couple of questions, so forgive me. Can we go back to slide 13? I just have a quick clarification. Are we assuming that paraeducators are included in the classified specialist asterisks of other? Where are those?
Pairs are not included in this analysis. They are not, they're hourly employees. Hourly employees are not classified as we don't budget them as FTEs within the system. They're budgeted at like an hourly rate.
So that contingency money in a school could be used to fund paraeducators.
The contingency money would be used to offset any October adjustments that that school would be planning on. That particular school was planning on that.
So can I also? So they do budget for paraprofessionals, particularly at the elementary level. And so what we've presented in these magenta E things is some FTE ratios and then some total expense figures. But behind some of this is additional detail. So if we broke out the full expenditure budget for either of these schools, you would start to see where they're budgeting for paras, even though they don't show up as an FTE ratio up top. That doesn't mean they're not there. They are in the budget. And you're actually right that some schools aren't sure if they're going to have to, have an October count that's negative, et cetera. Most school leaders, we find, prefer, if they at all think it's possible they're going to get to keep the dollars, to commit it to the use they want as soon as they can, which includes paraprofessionals, right? So they like to say, this is the right amount. They would prefer to say, here's the paras I can afford. I want to get the people. I want the people I have. I want to tell them. I want to keep them, all the things, as opposed to necessarily holding that what they might spend on paras in a contingency budget. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
While we're asking questions, I'd like to go back to slide 12 and just ask on the right-hand side, the third column, last column, $7,889 is the allocation total. How does that relate to what's above it?
I'm not sure, but I think basically we've divided 500-ish million by 63-ish thousand and gotten to this 7,900. So effectively, it's the total money allocated divided by the total kids. So it sort of represents something of an average, if you will.
Okay. And then, so if someone asks us, how much are we spending in our district per pupil? What is our SBB? Is that an answer, or that's just before we add on?
Yep.
additional?
So back to the slide where I was talking about some of the professionals in our schools are not budgeted through SBB. In fact, quite a bit of the budget of people in schools is not through SBB, as well as important other services that the district provides. The total spend per student, which is a number we're required by statute to publish every year, and we always analyze, at least out of the general fund, is something like $13,000, $13,500. I haven't looked at it. Please don't quote me on that. But that's about where it hovers, inclusive of everything, inclusive of, the transfers we send to transportation. So that effectively includes like our bus service, et cetera, et cetera. I could keep going, but you get it.
Yeah, I guess I'm really interested if I want to compare our district to other districts and, where we are, relatively speaking, in our SBB. It seems like there are different numbers. We need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, and so this question of, it's sort of a question of decision rights more than it is a question, and sometimes just logistics of how to best support professionals, more than it is how much kind of goes into a student versus something else. So I think the intuitive question that the community often has, and obviously the board members you ask about each year, is, well, how much are we spending on overhead? Like, we want to spend as much as we possibly can per student. This does not represent our per student spend.
Okay.
Okay, so the departments who provide, back to special education, the departments who provide really important critical services for our students with disabilities budget out of a department, in part because that means the resources can move more nimbly to follow the precise students. And also in part, there's just a reality that professional development for a nurse is better with a group of nurses. So there's just some logistical aspects of departmental budgeting that works for certain types of services that we give students. And so there's lots of different reasons, but this does not represent the maximum or even total. And so we'll be happy to come back to you and try and group expenses by kind of program, if you will, which starts to get, I think, probably more at the core of what you're interested in. And when we bring the summary, special education is still working on their budget and their allocations and all the things. When we bring the bigger summary, we'll highlight that for you.
Yeah, and I might add that this interest of looking at how do we compare on what we put into SBB, for example, to other districts, is also very tricky to answer just because every district does SBB differently. And some districts don't do SBB. They do like an allocation model. And so, and other districts do kind of a hybrid. And so everybody does things a bit differently. And so it's a really difficult question to answer. But I do think this question of like how much of our total expenditures are really going to the site level to serve kids on sort of what would be considered a daily basis in a school is something that we can work on.
That'd be helpful. Thanks. And then just another comment that I'd like to bring up a lot because the idea of declining enrollment is out there, a lot of publicity over it. But if I'm understanding it right, when we had presentations before, the fact that we have fewer kids coming in at the kindergarten, first grade, second grade level, they are not increasing, shall I say. And yet our high schoolers, when they drop off because they graduate, we are losing more graduates than when we are bringing in. But that's not because our district is doing something horrible and nobody wants to enroll in our schools. So I like to bring that up again, that it's because the graduating classes are bigger than the incoming classes. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
And in fact, our boundary study has confirmed for us that we serve about, I think it's Lisa, 91% of all school-age children who actually live in our boundary, in our Jeffco schools.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. It's about budget. It's wonderful. Okay, so for the FY 24-25, there's already been some major investments already made. Prior to the automatic adjustments in SBB, every year, take a step back, every year we adjust SBB to make sure purchasing power for schools keeps up with average salaries that are increasing year over year. So, all right, so outside of that. So prior to this automatic increase adjustment, there was an additional $5 million added to SBB allocations. This increase was to ensure schools could meet minimum staffing requirements and recommendations. And additionally, there was an increase of the at-risk factor to further differentiate supports for our at-risk students. There was also staff allocations and district-wide investments. These investments were for additional funds at elementary schools that house certain types of special education center-based programs to ensure each school can afford an assistant principal. There was also an allocation for mental health counselors and additional curriculum resources to schools, including consumables. This all totaled $8 million for the district-wide investments, in total over $13 million. Okay, so next steps in the budget development. The budget development process right now is still occurring. We're still in the middle of it. Schools are still finalizing budgets. There's still movement within the staffing, as Brenda mentioned. We are still making decisions at the school level. My team are still meeting with schools daily, all day, every day. So just know that the school budgets are not final. Also, department budgets are not final either. We are still making decisions through departments. Senior leadership is doing a magnificent job going through all the stop start continues and helping the departments make decisions there. So just know there will be adjustments from the time that you saw information today all the way up to the proposed budget. We will be making decisions all the way up to the day that we're putting the presentation together for you guys. Please note that also here we want to make the note that the ESSER expenses are still being coded today too. And if ESSER expenses are lower this year than expected, these expenses will be coded next year, which will impact the 24-25 budget. All right, so then we have a preview of the April study session. We're planning to provide an updated legislative update. Hopefully get a little more information based on the March economic forecast that we're going to receive. We'll also present any updates to the revenue projections based on the assumptions changing based on this economic update that we will receive. And we'll have a more in-depth look at the departmental budgets and additional district-wide investments. With the departmental budgets, we will align those to the Jeffco Thrives information to talk about the investments district-wide. And we'll also include preliminary plans to include certain programs funded through the ESSER 3. Okay, so we've answered a lot of questions so far, but we're open for more. Thank you.
I'll be
Director Applegate.
On slide 17, I was pleased to see we're adding the 5 million and the 8 million. Can you just remind me where those funds come from?
Magic. So it's an excellent question, right? And in a dynamic budgeting process, a dollar, you can only spend a dollar typically once. And there's just a lot of estimating that goes on to try and figure out how much is the thing we're trying to budget for going to actually cost next year, right? And so as a district, we have to estimate a lot of stuff. So the reality is the 5 million effectively came from, we were netting it out as we looked at enrollment, and we said enrollment's going to go down by this much on a actual basis, right? Set aside the fund account. And so that means we'll allocate out an estimated amount less. But given that, we're going to allocate some additional of what we would have allocated out less, so that instead of decreasing a number by this much, we decreased it by this much. Does that make sense? So that it was a dollar we had today that we're then, rather than kind of not spending, we are spending. The 8.2 million for, there really is no magic, to be perfectly honest. So the superintendent is in the midst of trying to figure out how much, if we squeeze here, squeeze here, squeeze here, stop this, start this, can we get in? And so given the timing of when we needed to make these decisions, because they so directly impacted the school budgets, technically it was a little bit ahead of the rest of the start, stop, continue process, but we're able, Brian and I are able to say, okay, well, if we shrink this and adjust this assumption, we should be able to afford this. Does that make sense? So it has a lot to do with just the overall process of how we're moving money.
So maybe to say it in an engineer way and not an accountant way.
Yeah.
We haven't necessarily given something up. We haven't given one for one. We have instead looked at the overall and made adjustments throughout the ether.
Yes, and you've heard me say this. We can only spend a dollar once, and all our dollars are district dollars, right? Like we are actually one entity. We're not separate entities. And so, when we look at that total revenue number, that's what we got. And we can either spend it here or here. We can't spend it both. And so when we commit it to a use, it is therefore not available to commit to another use. So it's sort of a both and. It doesn't have to be zero sum strictly, but in some sense, yes, we have a finite amount of resources and we have to make choices about how to spend them.
And is that that we accounted for that it's recurring? This?
Yes.
And are you saying that Most of that money came from unfilled like positions, vacancy, or
I did not intend to say that.
like I know you said we moved it. I understand the process you described, but what did we give up then? Or where did if it, I think I understand that we have a lot of unfilled positions, so there's a difference in our budget often. It looks like we have more money than we did because we budgeted for those positions. When you mentioned declining enrollment, or I thought that's what you were saying, but it sounds like no.
So we mentioned a little bit earlier that we allocated out through SVB fewer total per student allocations, right? To the tune of about 950. And what I was saying is that meant today's dollars. Now, again, because funded count is separate, funded count is already higher than actual count. So when we're talking about actual count, how much we distribute per kid, you could think of as it's a mix of what we actually brought in for that kid and some subsidy that's flowing to us from the state for the funded count above and beyond actual count. And so that's a dynamic equation that's changing over time. And so then the pool of funds available to allocate to schools is changing over time. And the overall allocation is changing by the decline in enrollment. And so effectively, I guess another way to say it is we would have not allocated out. The $5 million would have been part of a net adjustment down of the total school pool. However, rather than keeping the equation the same, we adjusted some of our per student allocations so that schools could afford these things. And we're basically using our average funded count to do that.
Thanks. And we get asked a lot about the, ESSER funds and what we provided. Are some of these funds providing more of that like ongoing funding for some things that we started during ESSER? Because I know there's a lot of questions like, what are we going to continue? What do we have to stop? And it seems like some of these are in categories that we funded during ESSER.
Yes, and I'm also happy to refer to Dr. Kim.
Some of the items that you see in the last bullet around additional curricular resources for schools, including consumables, does include the assumption of MAP Accelerator, Lexia, some of the things that we did initially fund with ESSER. And once we started seeing results, obviously, as we all sat down as cabinet and as ALT, looked to see what do we need to continue, because obviously it's making a difference for student achievement and student growth. And that is included in that line.
The follow-up, are we talking about other things that, and maybe this is expanding on this a little, but we just get asked so much about this. Like, what are we going to, how are we going to fund this?
Yeah, another example would be substitute rate, daily substitute rate. We subsidized that with ESSER because this district was only, I think, $100 when Superintendent Dorland got here per day, which wasn't market comparable to our neighboring districts. During her time here, we were able to increase that to 160 using ESSER dollars. The recognition that there's no way we could not do that when you think about going forward and the vacancies that we have to fill and how that impacts student learning. So that's another really large ticket item that is an example that we have to continue doing. It's necessary so that schools can operate and students get their best from their teachers. That's an expense that was within ESSER that is now moving over to general fund because it has to.
Are we going to get more of that, like a more comprehensive when?
Yeah. Last year we did it in that April, May, I think it was May timeframe. So my anticipation would be somewhere toward the end of the year, whatever works within your schedule. Am I scheduled in May or June? Okay. During that timeframe, I know I want to also be cognizant of, Brenna's grants team is helping to make sure that we're following the plan as much as possible as different budget managers within ESSER have things that they've accounted for, and going forward, recognizing what we intend to continue, and we'll bring that as a part of the conversation as well.
Are there any other questions? Thank you so much for this presentation. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you again next month. Okay. This afternoon's next agenda item will allow the board the opportunity to review and discuss recent legislative activities of the 74th General Assembly. And I'm hoping we can get Mr. Bowditch on if he's on remote. Activate him, okay. And at the request of the board, Mr. Bowditch will provide an update discussing the following bills. While we get him on, I will mention them: the Education and Finance Bill, HB 24-1039, non-legal name changes, HB 24-1154, Institute Charter Schools and Bond Indebtedness, HB 24-1282, ninth grade success grant and performance reporting, HB 24-1290, Student Educator Stipend Program, HB 24-1307, HVAC improvements for public schools, HB 24-1323, school graduation attire, HB 24-1331, out of school time grant program, and SB 24-088, charter school authorizations. And of course, board, if there are other bills that you'd like to discuss, we can do that as well. And do we have Mr. Bowditch? Yep. And if the board wishes to formally endorse or support legislation or oppose even, we can discuss this also during this time. Hello, Mr. Bowditch. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Please enlighten us on what the status is at the Capitol.
So thank you. Sorry I'm not there in person, fighting a nasty cold. I hope to be back at work tomorrow. I've been doing a lot of listening today. First of all, thanks to our board members, Parker, Kenworthy, and Varda, who all came down to the Capitol last week, and thanks to the superintendent as well. Today is day 57, so we are inching up towards the Saturday halftime date. In terms of a general update, the Joint Budget Committee is waiting for next Friday's. A week from this Friday is going to be the revenue estimates. And then they will finalize all of their decisions and introduce the long bill about 10 days later. I am still very confident that the BS factor will be going away. I don't see that changing under really any circumstance. I'm hopeful for school finance that the School Finance Act will be introduced earlier this year. We'll eliminate the BS factor, maybe have some money for rural schools, and that's it. And so we can have a clean School Finance Act. The K-12 lobbyists have been invited to a meeting with Speaker McCluskey next week, and she tends to kind of roll things out to us. So I'll probably know more next week. And I do always have to say, everything we talked about today is important, but the most important things that are going on have to do with property tax and measures that have been submitted to the ballot for this coming fall. One of them has already been certified to be on the ballot, and some of those could have dramatic impacts on the revenues for local government services. So we'll continue to watch those things. Madam Board Chair, I'd be happy to go over kind of the list of bills that you and I had talked about, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. First one on the list, House Bill 1039, non-legal name changes for students. This bill passed the House 42-19 after a lengthy and spirited debate. It essentially would require any school district would have to have a written policy that specifying that a knowing or intentional use of a name other than a student's chosen name is discriminatory. And a chosen name is defined means any name that the individual requests to be known as other than the individual's legal name to reflect the individual's gender identity. So this is also known as as I said, the non-legal name changes. At this point, not a lot of K-12 organizations have listed themselves as support. The AFT, the School Counselors Association is supporting. In terms of opposition, the Charter Advocacy Coalition, the Christian Home Educators, the Colorado Parent Advocacy Network. But as you can imagine with a topic like this, it did generate lengthy discussion when it was on the floor of the House last week. Happy to keep going down the list unless I see somebody waving at me.
Ms. Badge, just a
Sure.
minute. I'm not sure how we want to proceed. I mean, one of the things we could do is, as he presents the status of the bill, I think we could each, if we had an interest in it, make a comment. And so I'm going to make a comment on this one. I have been listening in on all of the debate, and I personally am supportive of this bill, and I am planning, if possible, to testify at least on behalf of myself when it gets to the Senate for their committee hearing, which I don't think has been set yet. So I'm just going to invite, if there's anybody else wants to make a comment on this bill from the board, please do.
I also personally support it. I believe that we have policies in place here in Jeffco that also recognize this particular right, and I'm glad that the state is looking at it, and definitely supportive. Happy to come and testify with you if you would like other voices, but also happy for you to represent my voice as well. I don't know if anybody else on the board wants to weigh in.
Is there any interest in the board taking a position as a whole on this bill? Dr. Applegate?
I guess I'd like to explore what Mr. Bowditch said about many of the school districts have not taken a direct, and I wondered if CASB had an opinion on this. I do believe that a lot of our policies in Jeffco support this already. So I would just be curious, the broader thought, and to make sure we're not wading into something that, well, just to know what we're wading into.
Yeah, to answer your specific question, CASB has not weighed in on this.
Do you have a sense for why other districts have not supported?
I think it's just, I can't really speculate why, but it's one of those issues that I think some of them may not want to get involved in this very contentious debate. But I think if the Jeffco board wanted to support the bill, I would have no concerns about how that would reflect on us.
I think Ed as well, and Julie, jump in if I'm off base, but I think most districts that I'm aware of have this type of policy in place and practice in place. And so then it becomes this question of, does there need to be a state statute for this to be the reality for the students? At least in Jeffco, it's not. It's not needed for us to do what we're currently doing in practice around preferred name. So that may also be why some districts are just maybe being silent on the issue, because it's something that they already do. There have been a couple of bills this session that I think most districts are like, well, we already do that, so I'm not sure we need a law around it. We have it in our policies kind of thing.
I'd like to also add that this is one of the bills that came out of COYAC on the Colorado Youth Advisory Committee, and I am just very much a proponent of listening to the kids and whenever possible supporting their efforts. So that's another reason why I support it.
President Parker, when you listen to the debates, what are the primary points against it?
The main point against it, I heard, was that they think this is another effort to take away parental rights, that it is hiding information from parents, because there's nothing in the bill that requires the school staff to inform parents if their child is asking to be called by another name. But I will say that the impetus behind the bill was for parents who do support their children and then want the school district to have to honor their children and respect them by using their preferred names. So it was brought forward by parents in support of the preferred names. But the other side was reading into things, frankly, that are not in the bill. There's nothing in the bill that even mentions parental notification. So they're just assuming or wanting there to be something in there.
I want to just lift up that Jeffco also already provides menstrual products to students. It's a practice that we do, and our board did take a stand or take a position on that particular piece of legislation. So I think that we've already set a precedent in this particular session that we could do that. And I would support, because when I got elected, I was very clear that the job is to support our students. We are here to support our students. This is supportive of our students. And that's my intention for the next 4 years, is to support our students. And I believe that this bill does exactly that. So that's why I would voice support for it.
To be clear, are we discussing board support, or are we talking about individual support?
Well, I guess what I'm looking forward to is if we get a majority of the board that would support it, would support the board supporting it, then we can just indicate that to Mr. Bowditch. But if there are just two of us now that individually support it, we're fine too, testifying on behalf of ourselves.
Yeah, I support this bill. And I think actually the fact that we do this in Jeffco is good. But and if we can show support that encourages other districts to do it, that would be a primary reason that I would want to support a state statute around this. And I just wanted to say, like, my daughter has a preferred name that's not the name that we call her, and no one's notified me, but it's not a problem. Like, you know what I mean? The teachers just call her that name. Everyone does. And when we talk, they speak, her name's Olivia, and she prefers to be called Liv. And that's what goes on everything. And yeah, I just don't see why that's a problem. So, personally.
I'll be bringing this up again. We just had the chance to meet with some of our student leaders, and they've asked, how do we elevate our voices? How do we get students involved? And I told them, write to your legislators. And so I think we need to respond to what our students say that they believe will improve their educational experience and show them that their voices do matter. And so, and I'll be bringing this up again on another piece of legislation. So I support our students on this one.
Would you like to call for a motion? And I can do one.
Yes, please. I'd like to call for a motion to take a position as the Jeffco School Board in support of this bill.
I move that we determine that the Jeffco School Board will support HB 24-1039, the non-legal name changes.
Roll call? No? Second. We need a second.
Second.
I want to check in with Ms. Tollison on process. Yeah, I'm not sure, because this is a study session, and I just want to make sure whatever the board is making decisions about is going to be actually appropriate for the meeting that has been noticed.
Right. Last time we did this, we had actually noticed that there would be possible action regarding the proposed legislation. So waiting until next week probably makes more sense. If we get a sense that there's some consensus, we could probably just embed it on the consent agenda, if that makes sense, or we can have a very brief agenda item. Just
It does say, should the board wish to formally endorse or support legislation, they will discuss it during this time, and items that require a vote can be added to the March regular meeting agenda as needed.
Then I remove my motion.
All right.
But I will add, I do support the bill.
So then what we're doing now is showing our support, indicating that we can put it on the consent agenda for next week.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
And Mr. Badich will know that we are planning to do that, and you can indicate that as appropriate in your conversations with legislators.
All right. Thank you.
And Mr. Bowditch, we can follow up with you after the official vote next week as well, just to let you know.
Okay. That sounds great.
Thanks. Sorry for that process check, President Parker, but I just wanted to make sure that the protocol that you all had put established to our public was being followed. So thank you.
The next bill, I'm not sure we need to spend a lot of time on. House Bill 1154. This is the Institute Charter School and Bond Indebtedness Bill, passed out of the House Education Committee last week. The title certainly got a lot of people's attention, but what this is doing is for any district that has institute charter schools, this would allow the school board to issue bonded indebtedness on behalf of the institute charter school with various requirements. So I think this came out of a Durango case where there's an institute charter school and the school board wanted to include it in a bond that was going out and just wanted to clarify the language. At this point, no one is opposing this bill.
Okay, any comments or strong feelings on this bill?
I don't have strong feelings, but I do think it's important to note that the public is aware of this one, and I've gotten some correspondence about it. So I think making sure, Ed, that we can explain how this works in the context of Jeffco for our listening public, I think that would be important. Not necessarily now, but I think that will become important when we take a vote to support or not. If we do.
As far as taking a vote, I think at this point, if we don't have people who want to put it on the agenda for next week, then we will just not take a position. Okay, we can move on.
Okay. House Bill 1282, the 9th grade success grant and performance reporting requirement. This passed out of House Education yesterday. This basically continues a grant program that's been in place for a few years, and it is due to expire at the end of this year, which is why the bill has been introduced. The grant program is about $2.8 million, so it's not an insignificant sum. I think for some of the next few bills that have grant components, if the board, there's a couple of things going on with grant programs, and not to get too far away from this particular bill, but CDE sent out a grant review process that they're working on. They want to look at they count 35 grant programs in CDE currently, and they want to get people's input, review them, and then potentially come back to the legislature and recommend elimination or modification of some of the grants in the 2025 session. I think as we have talked, the burgeoning number of grant programs, every year there's more and more, can be frustrating to everyone that more money isn't directed into school finance to allow districts to hire teachers, staff, address budgetary needs, and you have to hire grant writers and everyone's competing against each other. If the board really wanted to highlight any of these issues, you could consider just writing a letter and mentioning some of these programs, and the letter can go out to the entire delegation, and the letter can go out to the chairs of the education committee and just say, before you authorize many other multiple new grant programs, let's be cognizant of the impact on the districts or something like that. So you're not getting involved in every single issue, but you're raising the overall issue. So that was just a thought I had. But again, this one just basically extends this program, the 9th grade grant program. It's House Bill 1282.
Is there any discussion or comments on this one? Dr. Reed?
I just really want to push back on anything that's a grant program. Anything that's coming out of education funding, it just can't do that. It needs to go into school funding that everybody has a shot at on a consistent basis. So for any of the ones here that talk about grants, I'm just not a fan.
Okay, and we can consider Mr. Bowditch's suggestion of writing a letter. It is a follow-up to our priorities that we've already put together. We have that as part of our legislative priorities. What did we call it? Agenda. Okay, thank you. We can move on.
Okay, House Bill 1290, the Student Educator Stipend Program. This bill is a very short bill. It just allows this existing program to be funded out of the State Education Fund in addition to the general fund. So it just opens it up for that funding source as well. Again, no one's opposed to this. It would just give that one more flexibility. House Bill 13, I'm sorry, I can keep going. Jump the gun there. Any discussion? Or should I just keep going?
You can keep going, and then people can indicate as you're reading that bill if they want to comment.
Okay. House Bill 1307. This deals with HVAC improvements for public schools. So if a school is going to be getting money for HVAC improvements, either from some federal source or from some state source that is specific to HVAC improvements, this bill would direct the types of staff and the qualifications of the contractors that would have to be used for this program. Doesn't mean that if you're fixing an existing HVAC program with your own monies, this bill wouldn't apply. But if you're getting money from that federal source or from a state source specifically for HVAC improvements, this bill has its own cost, $120,000 general fund to be implemented. That may be enough to keep it from moving forward. It is sponsored by one of our Jeffco members, Representative Sheila Leader. At this point, in terms of support, the AFT, the AFL-CIO, the Sierra Club, and Conservation Colorado, and no one is listed as opposed.
You can continue.
House Bill 1331, this is a new program. This is the out-of-school time grant program, has bipartisan sponsorship. Nobody from Jeffco would create a $5 million grant program to go to organizations to help students with schoolwork and other things, either before school, after school, or in the summer. No one's opposed to this right now. The Boys and Girls Club, the Children's Campaign, some education reform groups are in support. This bill has not had its first hearing yet. I think this would certainly be an expansion of what the state does, and again, creating a new grant program for $5 million. That may be enough to have it not go through, just because I think once the revenue estimates come out and the Joint Budget Committee does all its balancing, from everything they're saying, it's going to be really tough to fund new initiatives.
Mr. Bowditch, I think we skipped the HB 24-1323 school graduation attire.
Oh, yes. My goodness. Oh, yes. I have that down at the bottom of the list. So happy to talk about that one. House Bill 24-1323 does not have any sort of grant program. It would just allow students to wear any sort of cultural or religious attire underneath their graduation attire. This bill, originally, it was more comprehensive. They brought back a second bill, and House Bill 1323 passed House Education yesterday on party line votes. Denver Public Schools, CEA, and AFT are in support. Case and Pikes Peak school districts are in opposition. I think there is some concern that this type of bill, while certainly has some well-intentioned, I think it's fair to say, would put the district administrators in the middle of adjudicating what is cultural and what is religious, and so there's some concerns by Case and the Rural School Alliance. So they could wear objects of cultural or religious significance as an adornment at a graduation ceremony, and prohibits anybody from restricting what a student may wear under a student's required graduation attire.
we made this change to our policies last year. Tara and I worked together with her team on this. This is the board's decision. I feel very strongly that the argument of this bill putting administrators in the crosshairs is definitely being perfect is the enemy of good. And I am in strong support of a bill like this, and I think it's about time.
I agree with you. And after meeting with some of our student leaders and hearing their strong support for this, this is one that I think our board could take a stand on, or I'd be interested in supporting that as a board.
So I'm going to speak as someone who has actually organized graduations. And I don't understand why what a student wears under their graduation attire would cause any sort of problem. Furthermore, this does allow for administrators to turn down things that could disrupt the graduation ceremony, which was what I brought up with our students. Would have been my one concern is, that sometimes these things can become inflammatory depending upon world events. But this allows for, I think, for reasonable limits on disruptions. And I think the ability of students to express what has brought them to this really important moment in their lives matters. And I would be in full support.
I also am in support of it. So, okay, so we will add this to our consent agenda for next week. And Mr. Bowditch, you can prepare yourself for support from the Jeffco School Board.
Can we go back to the out of school time? I have one quick question on that one. So, Mr. Bowditch, on 1331, we're saying that the General Assembly will appropriate $5 million. Is that out of the general fund, or would that also come out of the education bucket?
I don't remember, and really those two are kind of intertwined. I mean, it's one or the other, and they both can kind of. I'm sorry, I'm not being very clear here. If you appropriate out of the general fund, then there's more state ed fund available for school finance. If you appropriate out of state ed fund, there's more. I think it's general fund, if I remember, because I think the state education fund has certain limitations on what it can be used for.
Thank you.
And this bill, just to continue a little bit, talks about the type of nonprofit organization that could receive a grant would have to provide comprehensive services. So 4 days per calendar week during the school year, not less than an average of 25 hours per calendar week during the summer break, and so on. But it would be some sort of a out of school time program would be available to students who are enrolled in public schools, and provide comprehensive academic enrichment and related services.
Thank you. And I think you can
from
go
the
on.
And it's from the general fund. Okay. And then the last one that I have on my list is Senate Bill 88, entity authorizes charter school transparency. And this one's a bit of a fight going on. It's been put on the calendar a few times and delayed. It's supposed to be up again it's scheduled again for Monday by Senator Paul Lundeen and Senator Coleman. Bipartisan sponsorship. Right now, under current law, the Department of Education is required to prepare a report and evaluation on the successes and failures of charter schools, school reform efforts. And beginning in 24-25, this bill would require the department to report additional school district information that primarily compares district charter schools or institute charter schools to traditional district schools, and report information relating to the school district that has no charter schools, and publicly post all that information. I've talked to one member of the Senate Education Committee who is trying to really scale the bill back. Another member of the Senate Education Committee says all this information is available now. Why do we need this bill? So there is a lot of pushback on this. And as I said, the bill's was introduced almost 2 months ago and then still hasn't had its first hearing. It does cost a little bit of money. So even if it makes it through the process, it may get slowed up because it requires $179,000 in general fund.
Okay, no one is raising their hand on that one. And it does come to the end of the bills that we were listed. Do any of the board members have additional bills they'd like to talk about? Director Reed.
I would like to talk about HB 24-1003, opiate antagonist and detection products in schools. In the early 2000s, I had, Columbine had a situation where a student overdosed at a party and in front of their friends and died. And because I still have the good fortune to be in contact with lots and lots of former students on Facebook, I can tell you that this event has deeply scarred these children to this day. And when it happened, they talked a lot about the horror of watching this happen in front of them and feeling helpless and unable to do anything. And we have the ability here to support legislation that would prevent other students from going through this trauma. It was brought up, I just read in the Colorado Sun this morning that this was something that was brought forward by young people. And so again, I want to give our young people encouragement to get involved and to see that their voices matter and that what happens to them matters. And so I am very much in support of this one.
Thank you. I want to follow that by saying at CASB, the Durango School Board addressed this and it was brought to them through student voice. And this is a very real problem that our students are facing and witnessing. And I think that this is the sort of agency that some of our students really want so that they can take care of one another. This is community care. This is, I think it's incredibly important, and I know that our students are incredibly supportive of this particular kind of legislation. So I am firmly in support of it and hope that our board will be as well.
I also am in support of this bill. I did read it. Director Reed sent me the article, and I would be in favor of the board taking a position as a whole. And I think that's at least 3 of us and a couple thumbs.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just being asked to repeat this. This is HB 24-1003.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so I do think we have enough support to put this on the consent agenda for next week as well. Any other comments from the board? Any questions for Mr. Bowditch? If not, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Good to see everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 2.04. I will be presenting our next item for study this afternoon. And I do think that my comments right now are going to take more time than the actual work on it. We've received additional director district maps from our independent consultants, Flow Analytics, and there's a full presentation posted in board docs that covers content we have seen at 3 public meetings so far. Based on the 2020 census data for our 5 geographical Jeffco Board Director district boundaries, Flow has created maps that balance population across director districts. As a reminder to the board and our listening public, every 10 years after the release of the decennial U.S. Census Jeffco Board of Education, director districts should be reviewed in order to ensure compliance with Colorado state statute, that each district is reasonably equal in population and as contiguous and compact as possible. This process, called redistricting, is important in ensuring that each board member represents about the same number of constituents. The proposed district director boundaries must be approved by the board. Director district lines will not result in changing school or articulation area boundaries. In Jeffco, all directors are elected at large, meaning that if you live and vote in Jefferson County when there's a school board election, you have the opportunity to cast a vote for all open director districts. Adjusting our director district does not impact school or articulation area boundaries. However, it will have an impact on which schools each of us represents, and at least in one director's case, it may impact eligibility to represent her district in a potential second term based on address of residence. Throughout the process, this board has reviewed a total of 7 draft maps, 4 of which have been eliminated from consideration on prior feedback. I'm proud of the thorough and inclusive approach this board has taken, which demonstrates our dedication to equity and transparency. All of the draft maps under consideration accomplish 3 things. First, they align with federal, state, and local legal requirements. Second, they result in a total population deviation of less than 2%. And third, they maintain all schools in an articulation area within each board member district. Draft maps 2 and 3 would redistrict out the board member currently serving in District 2. Draft map 4 does not move any board members out of their district. Our goal is to finalize and approve the new director districts at next week's regular board meeting. Changes will take effect on July 1st, 2024. This timeline reflects our commitment to prompt and decisive action for the benefit of our community. The 3 board director district maps for consideration are on slide 18, and it's up there, which is also projected in front of us. You have access to the detailed package of information for each map as well. And before I begin discussion, Superintendent Dorland, is there anything you would like to add?
No, thank you, President Parker.
All right, board members, I think we have all had the opportunity to review these. And I'd just like to ask if anyone has a comment right now. Give us an idea of your preference. I will start. In all the maps that we've been looking at, my district, District 5, has not been impacted, has not been changed. So I personally have no reason to dispute any of the maps. However, after dialogue and discussion with other board members and understanding better the middle of the district, specifically director districts 2 and 3, I am in favor of map, the latest map at this point, map 4. Director Reed.
I'm also in favor of map 4, and I would like to thank Dr. Varda for challenging the idea of why we had set certain districts to be where they are, and I feel like this is the one that's going to work the best.
It's hard to change districts and articulation areas that will be different for us, especially we'll be 3 years in. So, yeah, but I support 4 also. No matter what, that happens to me. I switch into a new area. And so, yeah, it's a different experience than I expected in year 3 or 4. But, yeah, I support 4.
I'm in support of map 4 as well, and I just want to thank Flow Analytics and their team, because I'm sure we were not the easiest group to manage. So appreciation to their team. I know they're probably not on, but if you would pass that on, I would appreciate it.
I also support map 4.
Okay, we have a winner. So that this will mean that at next week's general meeting, monthly meeting, we will have on the consent agenda, or will it be separate? Okay. In any case, we will be voting on support and accepting MAP 4 next week. All right. And that gets us on to the next agenda item. Yes, we will be grabbing dinner. I am following the timeline here. If anyone knows if it's there yet or not. It's there? Okay. Is it okay to take our break now? All right, let's take our 15 minutes now. Okay, and we are back from our break. And the next item on the agenda is for the board to study and discuss its board policy GP07 around board committee structures. As a reminder to the board and our listening public, staff presented proposed revisions to policy GP07 at the board's February 9th meeting and received further input for revisions. Today's second reading reflects amendments aligned to the February 9th discussion. Staff also seeks direction whether the current draft is acceptable for final vote and adoption at the March 15, 2024 regular meeting. And I am going to hand it over to Ms. Tolleson, the Chief Legal Counsel, right now.
Good evening. It's great to see everybody again. Yes, we are back on GP07. I know we've really had a lot of thoughtful discussion around, and hopefully we can put it to bed tonight. I think I just lost. Oh, my slides are coming back. The changes that we've made here are really designed to address the feedback from the conversation we had at your board retreat last month. We're not going kind of from scratch, but got a couple of reminders about what got us here. First, we discussed proposed changes to GP07. We had a draft last month. A lot of those suggestions were from your board advisory committees. A lot of them just a tweak to their mission statement, tweak to their name. And ideally, the goal tonight is to set us up to have a vote next week on the consent agenda. But if you think we're not there, we'll come back and do this again. You'll also remember the process that we use for policy revisions. It's really a series of readings at kind of in a legislative fashion, right? So we can make revisions at any time in the process. So let me talk to you about what we've done since then. First, one of the things that we talked about last time, there was some conversation about, hey, we want to get more granular. We want to talk about how committees operate. I guess my recommendation to you, and obviously this is your policy and these are your committees, so you can do it how you'd like to, but just to almost think about it the way you did when you developed board ends, right, in your policy governance space. This is what we want, but the how it gets done is something that the committees all have slightly different feelings about how to do. So you won't see in the draft of GP07 big detailed, granular details about frequency of meetings, structure of meetings, any of those kinds of things. The goal here is to say this is the area in which we want to be advised. This is how we intend to set the membership of the folks we're inviting to help do that for us. And after that, we're turning it over to the committees themselves to sort of operationalize that goal. You've got a structure now where you're going to have an open house to get some new members in, going to make appointments in June, which should give us a lot more structure. We've had some committees where we've been confused about when do terms begin and end. The goal is to get some alignment there. Couple of different things driving the policy. First of all, most of these board committees are required by statute, and we covered that in the February 15th session. Beyond that, your policy will describe how they do what they do. But again, when we start talking about the weeds and committee bylaws will be the place where they can really talk about how they want to operate. Let them set that up for themselves. Okay. The changes we've made since February. First, one thing you did talk about is how you wanted the board interface to be described here. So you'll see an addition in the draft, which is in board docs, talking about each committee will have 1 to 2 board liaisons, and those will be non-voting members of each of the committees to listen back and report back to the full board. So while the committees themselves will be making regular reporting visits in open board meetings, the liaison will also be that specific point person for matters that are more down in the weeds. The policy now explicitly says what we already knew we do, which is that the superintendent has kind of a lead staff person, often cabinet level, but not always, who is that lead connection with the superintendent's office. And then the policy proposes that committees can have bylaws. I know one of the conversations we had last month was, hey, let's tell them all to have bylaws and have them submitted by a date certain. We have a couple of committees that don't have them. TDPAC doesn't have them right now, and is functioning well without them. Your audit committee, which is really just a subset of your financial oversight committee, doesn't have bylaws, and it probably wouldn't make sense for them to. Your curricular materials committee that we have on here is more ad hoc, right? They're going to be sort of summoned when you've got a challenge to a curricular material or want to involve them for the vetting of the adoption of a new curriculum, those kinds of things. So that's why right now the draft has this as, to the extent a committee would benefit from them, that they would have them and provide them to you all. Any questions about the bylaw approach that we've taken? Okay. Another place that we had talked about whether or not the board should weigh in, committees should weigh in, is the subject of term limits. We have a couple of committees with very specialized expertise and folks that I'm sure you'd love to have for as long as they'll stick around. So to say, if a committee thinks they need term limits because they want to be sure that they're cycling in new leadership and new involvement, that they could embed that. You're authorizing your committees basically in the current draft to embed term limits in their own bylaws. Another area that we touched on last month and where we landed, so you'll have to let me know. Remember, we had this point of contention, for lack of a better word, the Charter School Consortium and some of our charter partners here in the district were not comfortable with the role the DAC took a year ago in some charter renewal applications. DAC had some interest in being heard. And so where we landed is in this kind of less formal than we have in the new application context, which is called out specific in statute. And right now it says, provide input on renewal applications to the superintendent consistent with, and this is the statute that governs renewals, right? So it makes it really clear. They're looking at, has there been a material violation of the charter contract? Has the school failed to make adequate progress towards curricular achievement or growth goals? Have they failed to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management, or have they violated any provision of law? But to stay really focused in those renewal criteria space might help us avoid some of the challenges there.
If I could ask a question on this. I mentioned before my concern that if a committee is described and charged with being an advisory to the board, I had a concern if their reports are going to the superintendent. So on those lines, can we get also a direct copy of their input that they go to the superintendent, so it's not looking like it's going through another filter?
Yep. I mean, you get to have whatever you want in a lot of ways in this space. I think one of the reasons they had talked about, because the renewal process requires vetting on these very specific factors through staff expertise, to talk about embedding the DAC's feedback there, and also that it was that sort of compromise hybrid, right, between them making a specific recommendation to the board that might differ from the position that superintendent and senior staff have taken on a renewal. So you're right, it was a bit of an adjustment that it's through the superintendent, who is your sole employee, right, in that traditional policy governance lane. So
yeah, and I don't necessarily have an opinion about which direction to go on this, but the DAC, this is one small portion of what the DAC does, right? So I do think that the DAC's role and responsibility contemplates direct interaction with the board on many different things, like the UIP or a new application for a charter. The renewal was just a bit of a, we're trying to figure out the right language that feels good to you guys around the charter renewal piece. It's also, in any given year, we can have 3-4 charter renewals. And so I think there was some question about the amount of review and work that one subcommittee of the DAC would be required to do on an annual basis. So those are just some additional thoughts for you guys to consider as you're discussing.
Yeah, I see a difference, a distinction in a new charter application the DAC has presented to us. They've done a formal presentation of their work. And I can see in the renewals, we could not have that formal presentation by the DAC. But again, I would not want our only visibility into what they said, what they found, be in a line item. And I'm not saying you would hide anything from us, but being, summarized in a report from the district's perspective. So that's why I'm just saying if we can at least have access to their report.
Would you like that access to be specifically memorialized in the policy? I mean, because one option you have is just giving us directions, say when it comes in, we want it distributed, or we want it uploaded in board docs as part of the materials, and we can have that conversation informally. Or we could find a way to articulate it directly in the policy.
I just wonder if it's as easy as saying to the superintendent, consistent with CRS, and included in the superintendent's recommendation to the board.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Yep. So that it guarantees that the board gets the full.
Yeah. Can I say something? I just want to go back to the very beginning or closer to the top of the DAC bylaws. The purpose of the DAC is to serve in an advisory role to the Jefferson County Board of Education, period. And that makes me feel like this report needs to come directly to the Board of Education. It's in their purpose and role, stated in their bylaws. And so I think that what Mary is bringing up, I think, is really kind of an important function. That this whatever document or review they do, I think they need to have the guidelines and the guardrails in place, that this is what you're focusing on, now that you have a wide ability to argue with people about their teaching philosophy and methodology, but that they need to stick to the things in the statute that constitute a renewal. But I also think that report needs to come directly to the board without having an intermediary, I think is what I want to say. Go ahead, Paula.
Would it work to just say to provide input on charter renewal applications to the superintendent and board consistent with CRS 22 yada yada?
I think it works, but I'm looking around for consensus. All right.
I guess I don't know, this is really in the weeds, but if we're not around, those of us who have had this discussion, that's all I would worry about, is that whatever it says is clear, so people aren't having to figure this out again later or not realize that it meant that. So just being as clear as possible would be great.
And what I may do as we put final touches on the language is just share that out informally with a couple of you and say, are we capturing it? Right. I mean, I understand what you want. I just want to be sure, especially the goal might be to have this policy on next week's consent agenda. So I just want to be sure I've got the language reflecting how you want to do it. Okay. All right. This one should be easy. Your current GPO 7 has the District Health Advisory Committee in it. But as we started to do our homework, that committee is also called out in one of the district policies, ADF. You all don't currently appoint the membership. They never come and present to you. So the idea is it's a committee that, as a matter of because we receive federal funding, the district's got to have a health advisory committee. It doesn't have to be advisory to the board. It's not one of those that's called out. So the proposal is to remove it here. It'll remain in ADF. Its membership and function will remain as it already exists. And that is it. Questions, further comments? Otherwise, I can work on this DAC language on charter renewals. Maybe have a couple of you all vet it before we upload to board docs. And ideally, you'll see this for consent next week.
I have just a couple comments. I like that we finally have some consistency on the ABCD, the purpose and so forth, down to authority and term. This is a very nitpicky suggestion, and that is to have the committees listed in alphabetical order, just, for ease of looking up and finding out what a certain committee does.
I can do it even though I didn't go to a Jeffco school. I can do my alphabetical order. All right.
Any other comments on this? This was a lot of work, and so I
Well,
really
credit to
appreciate
Molly
it.
Ferrer, really.
Yes.
I'm just here taking all the glory. All right.
Yes, thank you very
Thank
much.
you all.
Okay, moving right along, our next agenda item is reserved for the board to receive and discuss an instructional resources recommendation to add creative curriculum to the district's catalog of approved resources for early learning instruction. In November 2023, a request for proposal or RFP process was initiated based on recommendation from early learning listening sessions and kindergarten entry assessment data. Approximately 80 preschool instructional staff had input about RFP priorities based on their knowledge of early childhood instruction, along with the early learning philosophy and Jeffco Thrives 2025. Following a period of review by several committees and an opportunity for public comment, district staff are recommending creative curriculum for board consideration. Before I turn this over to Ms. Nicothotis, Chief Academic Officer, Superintendent Dorland, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, President Parker. I'm very excited about this opportunity for our preschool educators as well as our preschool students and families. This is the next piece in our journey, the next sort of stone in the road in our journey to a comprehensive curriculum in Jeffco, and something that we are very committed to, and I'm very excited to be putting this stone in place. So with that, Ms. Nicothotis, and I'll allow you to introduce Lee, your colleague, as well.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Dorland, President Parker, and members of the board. Renee Nicothotis, our Chief Academic Officer here with you tonight, along with my colleague, Lee Pitalinsky, who is our Executive Director of Early Learning. So thank you for spending a few minutes tonight around something that we're pretty excited about. And as you know, we have been making great strides in our ongoing efforts to provide high quality instructional materials to our classroom teachers across Jeffco. And tonight we're super excited to present the next step around this within our preschool classrooms. So as you know, this is in direct support of a priority one, our learners, our future, within our strategic plan. And we do believe that with the inclusion of a curricular resource at the preschool level, we will continue to see greater and greater gains around social emotional learning, literacy, numeracy, and other aspects of early childhood development as a result. And I'll allow my colleague here, Lee, to discuss the impact of what we hope to see within this. So in alignment with our district policy, IJ, we are here to seek your approval to add the preschool recommended resource creative curriculum to our list of approved core instructional materials or resources in the early learning programs in Jeffco.
Thank you so much for considering this. Our preschools in Jeffco serve 115 classrooms across 51 schools, and next year we anticipate we'll be serving just over 2,500 students. Almost 2,000 of those are 4-year-olds, 657 will be 3-year-olds, about a quarter of them are students who have an IEP, and then we serve 112 students in dual language classrooms and many more students who speak multiple languages in other classrooms. So that's the impact of what this will do. And as we heard earlier, this started as a recommendation through the early learning listening sessions just over a year ago. And we saw that from our kindergarten entry data that something that would support our amazing teachers consistently across our district would also be helpful. So getting a new curricular resource was prioritized in the pre-K strategic refresh plan about a year ago. Since then, we initiated the RFP process. We went through a series of committees where over 90 people had direct input on this decision. And now we are bringing it to you for the final decision. So the process started with the RFP that was generated from input from, I invited all student-facing staff to have input, and 81 of them chose to tell us what they believed was important in a curricular resource. We combined that information with our philosophy and with the Jeffco Thrives 2025 strategic plan, created the RFP then had 3 different committees reviewing it. All of the information from those 3 committees was then taken to a cross-content review committee, which took a look at whether this resource actually did align with the goals it would set for it. And now we're bringing it to you. So those RFP priorities. The first thing we heard loudly and clearly from the people that interface with our children every day was that they wanted something specific to 3 and 4-year-olds. They wanted something that supported social emotional skills. They wanted it to be a way that they could teach children in a play-based, exploratory way, which is what research tells us is the best way for young children to learn. They wanted children to be able to participate at many different developmental levels in the same classroom. They needed something that would address all developmental levels in a cohesive way. They wanted materials that support diverse cultural backgrounds, students who had individualized education plans, and students who were learning multiple languages simultaneously. We desperately needed a solid Spanish component to meet the needs of our students. And a given is that it's aligned with our state standards, which are called the Early Learning Developmental Guidelines. So that resulted in a series of RFPs being submitted, and the 3 top contenders went out to the different committees to take a look at. And as each of them took a long and thorough look at the resources available, 70% of the resource review committee chose creative curriculum as their first option. 77% of the content review committee said that creative curriculum would be their first option. And then under public review, 76% said that we should put creative curriculum forward for consideration. And then 100% of that final group that looked at all of the information from those committees also agreed that creative curriculum was the best option for us right now. So here is creative curriculum for preschool. It has a lot of different themes that are easy for children, regardless of their background, to access. It is taught through investigations and has very specific ways that teachers can teach while children are playing and through play. A huge portion of their day is spent in play, and we cannot use that as a time just for a free-for-all. That needs to be a time that is guided and directed so that our children are learning and growing. Creative curriculum is developmentally appropriate. It's that play-based piece. It's also got options for small and large group instruction built into it. The investigations build on themselves through each week so that a child doesn't have to have a certain amount of information in order to access the learning. It has high-quality fiction and non-fiction literature that comes with each unit. It has direct and specific support for children with IEPs and dual language. And it's also, with every single activity, got a lot of different developmental levels addressed, and will tell a teacher exactly what they can do to support children at those different developmental levels. And finally, it's directly aligned with our state assessment and with our standards. So are there any questions that you still have about the creative curriculum or the process that it took to get there?
I'll start out. I'm interested in the number of students that have IEPs, because it seems to me if I have a 3-year-old, I will not have an IEP for the 3-year-old yet. I will not know that they have any educational needs. So are all our programs set to do IEP evaluations, and how does that happen?
There are a few different ways that a student can enter into an IEP. The first is if anybody has concerns that their child may have a disability, they can contact the child find. And if it is determined at that point that the child has an educational disability, then an IEP will be established before they even set foot into a classroom. The other way is when a child starts preschool, we give them a few weeks to get used to a whole new situation. And if there are concerns at that point, either from the parents or from the teachers, then they hold a meeting. It should be the teacher and the parents talking with one another to say, looking at this, and I'm wondering whether there's some additional supports that need to be in place. And then if the concerns continue after we've tried a few things, then the school-based team will evaluate the child, support the child, and if the child needs an IEP, Then we start that process. Every single one of our classrooms has students with and without disabilities served in the classroom because they're first and foremost preschoolers, and then we layer on the supports on top of that.
Thank you. That helps. And I'm wondering too, with a lot of our kindergarten through 12, K through 12, we have alternative schools and different places for kids that really have additional needs. Do we have anything like that for preschool? I mean, what would we do if we have a child who has significant needs that can't be met at the school?
The process to determine that a 3 or 4 year old's needs are so significant that their needs cannot be met at the school is done through the IEP. We typically do try and meet those needs for as long as possible in the classroom, because there is so much research that shows us that having typically developing peers and high quality instruction can mitigate a lot of those needs. We do have some center programs at the preschool level for children who are significantly impacted by autism, and we do have a center-based program for children who are deaf and hard of hearing, and who use a combination of sign and spoken language.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Applegate?
I just want to say I'm really excited that we are taking this step. Many of you know, I have a 3-year-old who is in our preschool system, and I'm just thrilled that we got to put our hands on the material and be able to see it and touch it and taste it. And I'm really excited for this step. Oh, she's probably going to taste it.
Yes, our preschoolers will taste it.
There's a theme about food and
But I was really pleased to see the materials and the fiction and nonfiction, and I had specifically requested the math, and just flipping through it, I'm super impressed with the concepts that we are going to introduce through play. So just really happy about this.
Thank you so very much. A lot of times people who are watching our meetings don't realize that we have had a chance to already look over these things. So I think, people look at it and go, this is for our youngest children, and they don't even ask any questions about it. And so what I want to say that I was particularly excited by when I had a chance to look at this outside of this meeting is the fact that it is so heavily play-based, and that when we were deciding on what would be appropriate, we specifically said, let's not do the ones that do a lot of screen time, and let's not do the ones that have our kids just sitting. That they're actively involved. So I do want to make sure that the people who are watching know that we have had a chance to look at this in greater depth, and that there are lots of really good reasons to think this is an excellent source.
I would just highlight the benefit of having a preschool vision, really a vision for instruction and a philosophy around how that should look for our youngest learners based on research. And I think having those things in place prior to making this selection helped us make a very solid choice in what's going to align to that philosophy and that vision and get to the outcomes for our kids. So, thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you because in our presentations, you described all the work that you did, which was a long time and lots of meetings, it sounds like. And so, and lots of input from different stakeholder groups. So it sounds like a ton of work put into this. So thank you for that time and care in that.
This is great. I'm glad I get to follow that. Can you tell us a little bit more, just for the listening public, so they can really understand the public review process that went on?
Yeah. So we took a set, at least one unit from each of the 3 resources that we were considering, with all of the materials that would come with that unit. And we took it to 4 different places in the district. So we had a school in the mountains, a school south, a school centrally, and a school north, and then in the Ed Center, where people could just play with the resources. They could look through the literature. They could look at the lesson planning options. They could really dig in and explore what they liked about it. And then there was a QR code that if they chose to have input, that they could then rate it according to how it aligned with those RFP priorities. and make any comments that went through. From the secretaries at the various schools, we had substantially more people than responded, but we did have 44 people who were not on any other committee respond with their preferences and what they would recommend through the process. And then just as I've spoken with people, a lot of them really went into their own pet preferences in terms of a resource and made some recommendations based on that.
Thanks. I want to also just lift up my gratitude for when we got to look at the resources, seeing how they are packaged and presented with ease for a classroom teacher. They come with the fiction and nonfiction books are included there. So it's, comprehensive, and it's not as though teachers are going to have to run around and try to pull every single resource that they need in order to do the work. And I also just wanted to lift up, again, the process that you undertook for selecting this, I think was really in-depth and well laid out and planned. And I'm thrilled that we've selected this curriculum. Thank you so much for your work and thoughtfulness that's gone into the process.
The amazing thing is that the thinking happened from the people that work with children every single day. So I think it's the right thing because it came from them.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to ditto what was said about all the work that you put into this evaluation. I also just want to give a shout out to Superintendent Dorland and the whole district and her staff, because I am very excited at the attention Jeffco School District has been placing on curricula now. I think it's so important if we want to move forward, improve achievement scores, and be able to understand what works and what doesn't. We need to have some consistency in what we're teaching our kids. Any other comments? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Okay, we have reached the final item on our agenda this evening to receive a preview of the March 14th consent agenda. As a reminder to the board and our listening public, Superintendent Dorland will be providing a preview of items for board action anticipated to appear as individual action items on the consent agenda at our regular meeting next week. I'll now hand it over to Superintendent Dorland.
Hello, thank you, President Parker. I'm excited to begin what has been a request of the board, reviewing the upcoming consent agenda items. Let me begin by saying that there is the possibility that this list of topics and items may adjust prior to next week, just given the nature of how we do business in districts and contracts that might come in that may need to be approved, whatever. But this really is in an interest to make sure that as individual board members and as a board as a whole are making decisions in your purview, that you have the information that you need going into that consent agenda approval, or the opportunity to discuss specific items and ask further questions. So you can see in the attachment here for our listening public, it's in board docs, and I know board members have it in front of them. We have some things that we've already talked about this evening on your consent agenda item, including the policy GPO7 and the early education curriculum, the two items that we just studied. It's also just really important, I think, for our public to see the board in their cadence. And when I say that, I mean the meeting cadence that the board has set up in Jeffco really is about a deeper dive opportunity for board members to study a topic, and then the next week come back and make some decisions. What sometimes people don't see behind the scenes is that once you study it, we get questions from you guys individually throughout the week, and it then allows us to make the materials within the consent agenda item more specific and or just answer your questions so you feel informed about your decisions. So please, if you have questions about those two things that we just studied or other topics on this consent agenda item, we are here and ready to answer and be sense makers for you. The board redistricting decision is something also that has been studied this evening as well as other meetings. We have some projects around capital investments, including a secured vestibule at Columbine Hills Elementary School. a secured vestibule and other upgrades at Warren Tech. Unfortunately, we have a contract to take care of some hail damage at some of our schools that you'll see here, mostly in the roofing space. And when Mr. Gatlin uploads the information items into consent agenda for next week on these items, he will have a cover memo that we have been working on with our previous board as well as this board, just trying to make sure that it has the just right information for you, but there should be a cover sheet for you to see those items. And we also have a contract award for our Northwest Evaluation Association, otherwise known as, or commonly known as, NWEA, and that is our MAP assessment tool. And you can see here that the estimated annual expense for that tool is about $550,000. And so it does require board approval, and it is the tool that we use in our schools to make sure that we're providing some interim assessments for our students. We also have a license expansion for Oracle and PeopleSoft coming your way. The board approved last April a contract of about $1.2 million for Oracle PeopleSoft. This is our enterprise resource program that we use for everything from managing finances to managing applicants and HR to managing payroll and all of the sort of business processes. This is actually a change order to add to that contract, the $122,000. We'll be going over that contract by that amount. And it is based on payroll. And so we need the board to approve this item, this additional change order to the original contract, so that we can continue to operate with Oracle, PeopleSoft, and make payroll happen in the next couple of months, which I know we all want to have happen. Apparently, what I've been told is that this is typical. Occasionally, we have to true up the contract on this with this tool based on our audit. And so the audit comes in, which you just reviewed last month, and because of the work that was done with payroll over the course of the audit, we then have to increase the contract occasionally. And that's what's happening this year. We also have sort of another interesting approval for you, which is a limited waiver district policy. We have a district policy that forbids alcohol on district property, tobacco as well, by the way, like just very good things for school districts to have in place policy-wise. But we do have a strong partnership with a foundation called the Two Angels Foundation Miles for Smiles event at the NAC Stadium. I don't know if you guys have ever been to the NAC for a community like fun run or event, but people do rent the NAC for community use. And I was there one day. My son had been there the night before at a football game, had left his backpack in the stands, and it snowed a foot that night. So we had to go back to the NAC, and the awesome employees at the NAC to help us find it. But we rolled in, and there was a foot of snow the night before, and there were people running all around the NAC. So they had this like fun run that they did. This was a while back in the fall, but it's really cool to see our community using the facilities that their tax dollars have gone into helping us build for our students, but then also provides for community use. This group is planning to have a fun run, and they plan to serve alcohol on this day. And so it requires a waiver of our district alcohol policy. And we are asking the board we're recommending that the board approve that waiver for this one day and this one event. This is not unheard of. It's not the first time this has happened, but that's what that agenda item will be. And again, this may adjust slightly here or there with one item coming on or another item coming off. But we just wanted to provide a preview for you. And I actually think this is helpful, I hope, for when we load materials on Friday and you're sitting there on Saturday, Sunday, or Tuesday night, whenever you have a minute to prepare yourself, you kind of have in your head, oh, I know what to expect. So we're hoping this is helpful for you. We're obviously always willing to take feedback and adjust process and procedure if you need something different, but it's actually helpful for me also. So just hope that this is a good process, and we'll continue to refine it as needed.
Thank you so much. This is incredibly helpful, especially when we've had a couple of consent agendas that had a lot of things on them. And so a friend of mine, when I was telling them I was prepping for my very first board meeting. They're like, well, don't look at the consent agenda stuff. That's fine. That stuff is fine. Just look at the other actual things you're going to study. And then I opened it and I was like, there's 24 things on this consent agenda. And I got really concerned. I was like, I have to read all of them now. If I didn't listen to my friend. And I'm a little bit glad that I didn't, because there was a lot there that I needed to learn about. This is so transparent and helpful, and just some clarity and some open communication, all of that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that this is something that we're doing now.
It seems like the other good thing about this is if for some reason we wanted to take something off of consent, then you would get the heads up well in advance. So, that I like that very much. I love this. This is very helpful.
I'm going to echo. I also really liked it. And I want to add that the CAC meetings are actually the same morning as our board meetings. And we go through a lot of these contracts, and those meeting minutes are available on the Jeffco site. So if you ever need help finding them, let me know. But a lot of this stuff is stuff that has been reviewed quite a few times at the CAC already. So just for extra context.
Question. So if something comes up on this that we do want to discuss, what's the process? Is this the place to do it, or we just know now and then we go through a normal process? I just wonder what's.
I think, I'll let Mary talk about how you want to handle it in the meeting, but if you had questions about these items, my hope would be that you send your questions to me and Lisa and Jennifer, so we can start working as quickly as possible on getting you and the rest of the board answers to the questions you might have. I think that's up to you, the board, Mary and the board.
Because I have questions, so I'm asking it at this meeting. The Oracle PeopleSoft item, that's something, it's a yearly license, and this was a change order to it. So my question is, I thought the district may be looking into new ERP solutions. So can you update me?
I can answer. So we are looking into a new ERP solution. We're in the process of gathering information about what our processes and procedures are with our current ERP, so that we can better understand what our requirements are for the new ERP. What processes and procedures do we want to keep? What do we want to replace? As you can imagine, our ERP is dated. It's on servers. Most people have moved their ERPs to the cloud. We have not. And PeopleSoft has indicated to us in the coming years they plan to stop pushing updates to Oracle, their PeopleSoft program, through servers, that it would just be cloud-based in terms of their maintenance on their side. So we do have a bit of a timeline. It's not like tomorrow. The challenge with the district not having looked at this sooner and sort of letting it linger is that we have many customized and sort of overlaid processes and procedures that have been built into PeopleSoft. And we're right now having the conversation around how off the shelf do we want something to be versus how customized do we want things to be. It's a huge change management process for folks who are in our operations departments in particular. And we want to make sure that we're moving at the, in this case, it's not only the speed of trust with our staff who use these systems every day and need them to conduct their work, but it's also the speed of success. There are other districts who have done this work, and it's taken 3 to 4 years. We are actually talking to several districts across the nation who've done this. Somewhat different scope, somewhat similar scope, and we're taking some lessons learned from their district leadership teams. And so this is the ongoing current system. We also are spending money right now sort of exploring and building an RFP and really putting a project plan together to figure out how in the next 3 to 5 years do we shift our core operations from this system onto a new system. And it's very complicated because it's not, these are systems that you can't just flip the switch on overnight. So you can't just one day use this system for payroll of 14,000 employees and then overnight flip the switch and use this new system for payroll for 14,000 employees. It's just not that simple. There's a lot of testing of the new system that has to be done so we know it'll actually work before we turn the old system off. So there'll be needs for us to invest in both exploring a new system and actually implementing a new system kind of behind the scenes, while we're also continuing to invest in the Oracle PeopleSoft program that we have now. There'll be some overlap in the next few years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have a question about the contracts. Are all three of them new contracts? They're not addendums, like additional. Because sometimes it'll say this is the contract and we're asking for an additional amount.
I don't know. I think the secured vestibules and Warren Tech I think was already approved, but maybe they're doing the vestibules as a package. I don't know. Do you know?
Yeah, and when you say new contracts, like a new project or?
Well, what it's on the consent agenda, is it to approve a new contract, for example, of 2.5 million at Warren Tech, or
Yes.
an additional one? Oh, it is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so this has come up a lot, I think, in our time here. I don't know how to vote on these not because I don't think they need to be done, but because I don't know how it affects our overall budget. And the budget that we've been presented up to this point spends down, for example, the CIP. So
I think this is an area where we need to take your question back and make sure that kind of we've been working on, as I mentioned, a memo that goes sort of a cover page to each of these projects. And it'll share, like, I know both of these projects were contemplated in the original scope. And so we can show you what the original budget was and if it's coming in higher or lower or on budget.
That's what I was asking.
And so I don't have the memo in front of me. We're still getting materials ready for next week. And so I think that information we'll take back that's an interest and make sure that's included. It sounds like looks like Lisa wants to.
Yeah, I just want to say that's going to be a challenge of doing this at this meeting. Mm-hmm. Like, we want to do this and we might not have all of the information.
Yes.
Because we're still gathering that until this coming Friday. And so sometimes, because Jeff's teams works really hard to put together that memo, and that's just going to be a reoccurring thing. If we do this on Wednesdays, we're not always going to have all the info. So I just want to.
Yeah. But we know now that that's a question you have, so we can work on, and that is included in the memo, I think, the structure we have right now.
And in addition to the memo, like, this is what we've asked for, I think, for a few years, is seeing the big budget. And when we take, so seeing the CIP, where is it going to come from? And these are all like pie charts that we see all the time and to this point. So putting these in context of the larger budget is something that doesn't happen a lot, almost ever, on our consents.
Can I suggest something? So we see those at the CAC, and so maybe what would be helpful is those charts that we look at to make that part of the memo, the cover letter, because we do see a lot of that in that committee. It doesn't get brought up to here. I certainly believe that, and it is hard to see it. But I think, and Mr. Gatlin can correct me, I think the first two were on the schedule. They're just coming time for the bids to come in. So that's my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong on that. But I think the bids are coming in. And so I guess that raises a question for me is, are we approving the funding of the budget without having the bid come in? Sorry, I just talked myself into a question.
Yeah, the one we don't have, we're expecting the bid, I think, tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so we're in that time frame where we're hoping we will have a firm bid to present
before next week.
Yeah, before next week. So, and we will certainly include the implications of these contracts and how it is impacting the overall CIP and the unallocated, and we'll make sure that that's clear in the memos we provide with this.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate this opportunity to see things in advance and ask questions in advance, and thank you. All right, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. We'll stand adjourned. Our next regular scheduled meeting of the board is scheduled at 5 o'clock p.m. on March 14th at the Ed Center. Have a good evening.